That's all I'm going to do at the moment. There's no coolant running through the inverter. There's no gearbox oil in there. I risk damage if I do anything more than just that little simple thing. In fact, I'm going to put it back into park. This is my 900 horsepower electric Ford Escape project, and that clip you just saw was how the most recent installment of this project series ended a year and a half ago. Since then, this project has progressed very little. Basically not at all. This project has been a series of setbacks, failures, and questionable decisions. Just last week, I finally got over the biggest hurdle of this project, the biggest thing that was holding me back for well over a year.
Let's hit this button and watch it not work. Huh? What?
But we'll talk about the solutions to my problems later on in the video. But first, I want to explain what's been holding me back on this project. And conveniently, what's been holding me back on this project could be neatly grouped into 3 categories: the VCU, the batteries, and me. First, the VCU, the vehicle control unit, the brains of the whole operation. To help explain the issues I've had with this thing, I'm again going to show you that clip that I showed you at the beginning of the video. That clip from a year and a half ago. Except this time, I'm not going to cut it off early. I'm going to let it play out so you can see for yourself the moment of disaster that never made it into the final video. Which is no different than neutral at the moment. We have motion! Now you'll notice that that is spinning in reverse. That's because this front drive unit is mounted in reverse and I haven't reconfigured it to drive the other way yet. Oh, I didn't put it in. Stop! Off! Off! Oh, it's stuck. It is properly stuck. That was weird. Didn't look like much, did it? In case it wasn't obvious, what was happening is the motor kept spinning despite me not asking it to, so I hit the brake switch on my little test setup here. I tried to put it in park. I tried to turn it off. The VCU was seemingly frozen because it wasn't responding to any of my inputs and the wheels were still spinning. So in a panic, I yanked the 12-volt power from the VCU. Of course, that did the trick, cut off all power, and the wheels stopped spinning. So what's the big deal? Well, I didn't know it at the time, but that was the last time this ever worked. In the product description document of the VCU 300, not the user startup guide or the pre-start checklist, the product description document, there's a very pertinent warning under the power and calibration storage section. It says, at key off, the VCU will store calibration data. During this time, the main relay will remain on. Calibration storage may take up to 15 seconds, after which the main relay will automatically turn off. Removing all battery power during this time can result in calibration memory corruption. Do not remove all battery power until the main relay turns off. Wait at least 30 seconds. In that clip, I did exactly what that paragraph warns against. I did key off, which was the wake input, and then before the VCU had turned off, because it was seemingly frozen, I disconnected 12-volt power and apparently corrupted the memory. After that, when I turned the VCU back on, all the configurations were randomly flipped all over the place. And the VCU was never the same again. I multiple times reflashed the firmware, and every time I reflashed the firmware, I reset it back to factory defaults, but it was never the same again. It seemed like every time I reset it back to factory defaults and redid the calibration from scratch, there was some new weird thing that was wrong with it, and I could never figure it out. One time, it latched the pre-charge contactor closed and wouldn't let go. It blew up a pre-charge resistor doing this. Another time, after about 5 seconds or so of attempting to close the contactors, it just shut off 12-volt accessory power.
Interesting. It shut off again.
But what it never did again was close contactors or drive the motor. Now, I'm not going to say that this VCU is bad or that there's something wrong with it or anything definitive like that, because it could very well still be my fault that this thing isn't behaving properly. I've had a bad experience with it for sure, but it could be my fault. And I've been wrong about this thing before. For instance, I thought until today that this thing had a design flaw where if you disconnect 12-volt power, it wipes the memory. But I just tested it on this little setup here, and I was wrong. Now, under certain circumstances, if you disconnect 12-volt power, it will wipe the memory, but I thought it was all the time and I was wrong. Regardless, this thing was behaving in all sorts of weird and wacky ways, and despite screwing with it off and on for several months and going back and forth with AEM tech support, I never got this thing to function properly again. I never got to close contactors or drive the motor, or even behave in an expected way. Which brings me on to my next point. The documentation for this thing is limited and AEM's tech support is subpar. The publicly available documentation for this thing, and I just checked, it is still the case, consists of a 21-page product description, a 10-page pre-start checklist, and an 18-page user guide. That's it. That's all I had to work with when setting up this thing. Later on, they did send me more complete documentation for this thing. It was a couple hundred pages long, answered many questions. But why did that have to be emailed to me? I didn't know that document existed, otherwise I would have requested it, and they didn't send that document to me until a year after I got the VCU. And their support, I didn't have great experience with. I either had a guy who gave me excellent, detailed, fantastic responses to my questions, but wouldn't respond to his emails, or another guy who did respond swiftly to his emails. But the responses he gave were less good. And in fact, sometimes I looked at his replies and thought, I don't know enough to say that that's wrong, but that feels wrong to me. In fact, my last correspondence with that guy was him saying, oh, of course your VCU doesn't work. You've got to have the BMS and current sensor wired up. Otherwise, it won't close contactors or make the motor spin. But the one time I did get it to close the contactors and make the motor spin, the BMS and current sensor were still in their boxes. And I told him that and also added, is this something that's required by new firmware maybe? And he didn't respond. So I did what any reasonable person would do, and I gave up on that VCU. I was tired of messing with it, and I didn't want to look at it anymore. I did eventually find another VCU that works, and here's proof. Ready for this? Haha! But we'll talk about that later. First, batteries. It even stops. This video is brought to you by Factor, ready-to-heat meals delivered straight to your door. Welcome to the first segment of Answers with Robert. Answers with Robert. Viewer Pan writes in and asks, Robert, Factor meals sound as delicious as they are easy. However, I've accidentally locked myself in my own workshop. I've been trapped here for 5 days, which means I no longer have access to a microwave. What am I to do? Well, Pan, the first thing you're going to want to do is order your Factor meals at Factor75.com and make sure you use code 50AgingWheels at checkout. You've got plenty of options. They've got keto, calorie smart, vegan, and even gourmet options, as well as many different add-ons. Then once your meals have arrived, I don't know how you're going to get them inside, but that's your problem. You're going to want to pick your meal, slide off the cardboard cover, then stab the film to vent it using whatever tools you have around the shop. If you had access to a microwave, this is the point where I'd say pop it in there for 2 minutes and you got a delicious meal ready to go. But since you don't, here's what I recommend. Oh! I think I burned it. That didn't work. Sorry, Pan. You need a microwave. Answers with Robert. If you're not trapped in a workshop and do have access to a microwave and want to try Factor for yourself, go to Factor75.com and use code 50AgingWheels at checkout for 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's Factor75.com and code 50AgingWheels at checkout. How does chicken come out of a microwave this good? Thanks again to Factor for sponsoring this video. I regret my choice of battery for this project. If you watch my batteries episode, you'll know that the reason I didn't go with easier to use, more readily available, and cheaper Tesla modules is because they're not powerful enough. I chose these hybrid batteries because they can belt out huge amounts of amperage, and they can make my 900 horsepower electric Escape actually be a 900 horsepower electric Escape. So that's why I chose these hybrid batteries, but they came with the downside of no integrated cooling. I'd have to build my own cooling plates for these to sit on. They're significantly less energy dense than Tesla modules. They're more expensive and they're much more difficult to mount. Having to build my own cooling plates seemed like a fun challenge until I went to actually do it. I did not give myself enough time. I put together one as a test. That wasn't enough testing, and then I just went ahead and bought all the supplies and built all 6 of the cooling plates. Here's one of them, and they're assembled with epoxy, and just like so many of you predicted, they leaked. All but 2 of them leaked fed with just the tiniest amount of air pressure. So these are worthless. I did design a new cooling plate to be held together with rivets instead of epoxy, and I redesigned the cooling path. Here's the laser cut core of that redesign. But I kept screwing up the laser cut order. I ordered skins, but accidentally left the cooling path drawing in the skins, so this is useless. So I made a second order. Here's that. No cooling path in this one, except I made a mistake and only ordered one skin. It's an open-faced sandwich. When I got this, I thought, am I just a screw up? Why do I keep getting this order wrong? This new cooling plate design looks fine. It's going to require a metric ton of counterboring and countersinking for all the many rivets in here. And I have to order the skin for the other side. But I just kind of dropped it. I started working on this in, I don't know, March of last year, and I just kind of forgot about it. Mounting these batteries has also proven to be quite the challenge. I already built one battery box for the front of the Escape that went in the engine bay, and I showed you that on a previous video. The main thing you need to know about that battery box is, I hated it. I finished it cosmetically for the video, but then this is now all that's left of it. The bottom frame, and even some of this I'm not going to keep. Like this polycarbonate base plate, I'm going to replace that with aluminum. And the mahogany blocks I used to keep the modules in place, yeah, you knew I wasn't going to keep that. Off camera, I designed these little support bars that is probably the design I'm going to go with if I choose to keep with these modules. And also, these are modules out of a Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid. Chrysler has issued a recall on all Pacifica plug-in hybrids over a fire risk related to manufacturing defects in the battery modules. EV West, who I bought these battery modules from, assure me that there's nothing to worry about. However, this battery module has been living in a metal trash can in my driveway known as battery jail. Do you see why? One of the pouch cells in this module got all puffy and is even torn open right here. I've never charged or discharged this module at all. And if that pouch cell in there tore open doing absolutely nothing, what's going to happen when I send current through some of the other battery modules? Now, credit to EV West, I told him what happened to this module and sent him a picture of this torn open pouch, and without asking any follow-up questions, they sent me a new module for free. That was awesome customer service. But I'm kind of afraid of these modules now. I mean, look at this thing. I took Puff the Magic Dragon back out to battery jail, and this one also has a problem. Somehow the cell balance leads on this one got internally disconnected. No idea how that happened, but I can't use this module now. Two directions I'm considering going with the batteries, and I haven't made a decision at all yet. There's lots of factors at play here, but direction A is forget about the hybrid batteries, go with Tesla modules like I probably should have done to begin with, and just be okay with it not being a 900 horsepower Escape. What if it's a 700 horsepower Escape? Oh no. And direction B is continue on with the hybrid batteries, but reduce complexity by not worrying about cooling plates. They weren't really even necessary to begin with. And also, I don't know, park the Escape outside from now on in case it catches fire. Maybe I'm being silly worrying about it, but would you trust these batteries after seeing that puffy one? So yeah, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about the batteries yet. And also, I got to add in that the only way I'm going to go with different batteries is if I get those different batteries for either free or very cheap. I already spent a ton of money on these guys. I'm not looking to duplicate that expenditure. Which brings me on to the me portion of the holdups. I can't seem to find the middle ground between overanalyzing and not getting anything done and making decisions too quickly and regretting them later. With these batteries, part of me says, no, these battery modules, they're subpar. I should look for something better. And the other part of me says, you've already got the batteries, just build the stinking battery boxes already. Just get it done. And maybe I should just get it done. That's what Joey Beepus told me to do.
It's more important that you finish the f***ing project.
I love that advice. Also, you should watch the rest of that video. He makes some very good points. However, my project is a whole car. I have to live with this when it's done. If I make a compromise now and say the battery boxes, that's basically permanent. Ain't no way I'm coming back later to rebuild the battery boxes. I'm way too lazy for that. Of course, there's tons of YouTube channels that make tons of throwaway car projects, but I'm not one of them. I'm not gonna do that. Speaking of motivation, yeah, I've had quite a bit of problem with motivation on this project. It's just so big. I still have problem with motivation. And it's easy to look at the problems that I had with this VCU and say, yep, that did it. That killed my momentum. But really, I was already struggling enough to get motivated for this project as it was around this time period. I think any setback I could have experienced, big or small, would have killed my momentum, and it just happened to be this VCU. And since I hadn't worked on the Escape since March, getting started again proved a whole other fiasco. Luckily, I have a friend who offered to help me on the Escape if I needed it, and finally in December I said, hey, I've got a new VCU. Could you come down and help me wire it up? So him and another friend came down and helped me wire it up. Thanks, Eric and Ryan.
Values! You're supposed to act excited.
Hey, look at him. We also have a keypad.
Oh yeah, this all works.
Now give thumbs up to the camera.
All right, I didn't tell you what I got to replace this yet. I looked into 2 replacement systems. The first one I looked into was from EV Controls. But because I have 2 large drive units instead of a large drive unit and a small drive unit, that meant I was going to have 2 completely separate VCUs from them. It was going to be messy and it was going to be expensive. And I sent them an email asking them a basic question. They were unnecessarily rude to me, so screw those guys. Another solution that I actually purchased an example of is from Open Inverters. Now, this isn't a VCU. This is a replacement control board for the large drive unit. So if I wanted to go with this, I'd have to have 2 of these, 1 for each drive unit, and I'd have to have a replacement VCU solution. Could be as simple as an Arduino. But I didn't go with this or even set it up because after this arrived, I found out about something else that existed that would be significantly easier. I had a prior relationship with AEM. They never paid me, but they did send me loads of components, including this VCU, at no cost, which made the decision to stop trying to make this thing work a little more challenging because I had all these other components, BMS, I'm looking over there, PDU, dash, CAN keypad and stuff that work seamlessly with an AEM VCU. The only problem was I couldn't get the VCU to work. But then a couple months ago, I was browsing AEM's website and discovered they released a new product. The VCU 275. This isn't a replacement for the VCU 300. This is a replacement for the VCU 200 that I didn't have. But crucially, this supports 2 drive units, so I could use it. So I bought one, and I paid for it with my own money, so I can say whatever I want to about this. And if you're curious, it was $1,500, which if you think, wow, that's expensive, well, this VCU 300, the retail value on it is $3,900 right now. I like this one so much better. First of all, they had more complete documentation available publicly online for this one. I didn't have to email anyone to get documentation. And crucially, this VCU didn't fight me. It just sort of worked. Me and the other 2 guys got this initial setup done in a day, but we didn't get the motor spinning by the end of that day. The previous VCU, I was able to get the motor to spin once without the BMS wired up, but this VCU seemingly did require the BMS to be wired up. So over a couple of days, I wired the BMS up, and then
Let's hit this button and watch it not work. Huh? What? What?
brake switch off. It's spinning! 12-volt power on. Flip on the key. Wait for the dash to come on, although I don't really need to. There we go. 360 volts. PACA, so C is a completely made up number. It says I have 62 miles of range. It's just making that up. Now I will close contactors. They're closed. Flip on the brake. Put it in drive. Turn off the brake. And the motor's spinning in the correct direction. I've turned off creep and turned on regen. So if I spin it up a little faster, slows right back down. It works! However, there is a problem already with the VCU. There's something very wrong with the throttle response with the motor direction reverse, which is important for the front motor because it's mounted backwards, so the motor direction has to be reversed. But I'll demonstrate on this rear motor here. If I put it in drive, and I've configured this one backwards, so the wheels will spin backwards and give it a big stab of the throttle, it doesn't do much. But if I put it in reverse, and do the same stab, it spins up quickly. If I flip the direction of the motor so it's spinning the correct way, it becomes drive that has instant throttle response and reverse that's severely deadened. And that's a problem because the front motor is mounted backwards. I could have sworn the throttle response in the correct direction on this front motor wasn't like that before, but it doesn't matter because it's like that now. So I'm talking with tech support about this issue. Not AEM tech support, the tech support of the company I bought the VCU from. We'll see if they're better. And that's it for now. I wish I had a little more to show you. I was going to hook up both motors and drive them both at the same time. I even ordered parts for it, but we had a snowstorm and those parts are still stuck in shipping. And I can't put the batteries and the controller and everything in the Escape and drive it under its own power because I don't have coolant pumps for the motor yet. So that's all I got for you now. I've had a lot of people ask me, what's happened with the Escape project? So I thought I'd give you a little update and say, this is what's happened with the Escape project. And now that I've gotten over the biggest hurdle of the project, which is getting the VCU to work, I'm confident in saying that this project is back on now. Now, as for timelines or deadlines or anything like that, I'm going to take my time on this project from here on out. I want to burn myself out on it again. But that's not to say that I'm going to procrastinate on it. I'm just not going to rush on it. I'm going to piecemeal this project, take it one step at a time, taking breaks for other videos and other projects that I want to work on. I'm not just going to dedicate 2 whole months at a time to working on one specific chunk of it, and I have to get that done. That's over, and the escape will be finished when it's finished. Thanks for watching.